Eco version 9.2 dropped a few days ago, along with some immediate hotfixes, and it came with some really good additions and improvements to the game. So let me go over some of those biggest changes and talk about their impact to your gameplay. I'm not going to go over every small detail, but I am going to hit what I feel are some of the bigger and more impactful changes they've made. First, maybe one of the biggest things was the introduction of an industrial elevator. This is something that's been needed in the game for a long time, and there's been a third-party mod that provided one of these larger elevators. The elevator we've been working with in-game up to now has only been big enough to carry yourself and one of the larger wooden carts. The mod I mentioned was nice because it allowed you to at least fit a full-size truck. But this new industrial elevator that's now available in-game is leaps and bounds above all of that. Not only is it something in-game so you don't have to worry about losing your item with version upgrades, but they designed an enormous elevator that was a lot bigger than even I was expecting. This new elevator occupies a footprint on the ground that's 8 by 12 and 7 blocks high. And to use it to go down into a mine, you need an enormous hole that's 6 by 10. For me, making a shaft for this elevator has wound up being its own project in itself. But that's what makes Eco really cool. There's always the next thing to do. When I'm done, I should technically be able to put 4 full-size trucks on here, or my excavator, skid steer, and a truck. It's just going to be huge, and I'm really looking forward to using this thing. Next was the introduction of some silos. These silos are specifically designed to store crops, seeds, and fertilizer. But their advantage is that you'll be able to store much larger stacks of items than what you can carry in any of the other containers. It is true that after your server really ramps up with a lot of activity, you do wind up harvesting thousands of wheat and other products. And rather than having to store them in dozens of different chests, this could help centralize your products into these silos. And besides that, the silos just give another really nice look and another building that can be created. They introduced some new build forms for the corrugated steel, which I'm really happy to see because the corrugated steel never really seemed to get a lot of love from the players in the game. In 9.0, they did improve the look of the corrugated steel, but now they've added a wider variety of the build forms to it as well, to make it more competitive with the other Tier 3 building material, which is reinforced concrete, which is also something they changed. I didn't find it in any of the patch notes, but the reinforced concrete also got a couple new build forms for it as well, including these guardrail or barrier looking things. Next was some added gameplay. They put in a concept of residency, which is going to change a lot of people's strategy on how they go about getting skill points from housing. Before, you could claim land in various places in the world and set up rooms that counted as housing in multiple locations. So you might have one house bringing in skill points that's your true house, and have some rooms in your workshop way out in the desert where you're mining to add more skill points, and maybe even some rooms in an upper floor in the downtown area where you have a separate claim and where your main store is, and that is also making you some skill points there as well. Now in the game, you have to declare a single piece of contiguous land as your one single residency that will work as your skill point generator for housing. You can build those housing rooms on other plots of land, but you'll only get skill points from the one you chose as your residence. What also comes along with this is the ability to share your residence with other players. You can open up your home and share it with others to also share your skill points, and at your discretion, participate in its furnishings or build out. The more residents you have, the more your skill points are divided. This concept of residency not only puts some constraints around your house, but I think it opens up some really interesting possibilities for collaboration. And it's also the initial step they're taking to include a rent feature in 9.3. In 9.3, you'll be able to more effectively in the game rent property to other players, which could provide a huge advantage for long-running servers that have obtained high-tier building material and still have new players joining. They could rent out a room or dwelling with high-value skill points, which would be a big step for someone new to the server to get those kinds of skill points right at the beginning. Now I know what you're thinking. A new player won't have much money to be able to rent one of those places. But from what I understand, the rent won't be based on just a global currency. You could instead make the rent based on the number of tortoises provided each day, or something like that. And maybe even scale that with the person's skill or total wealth. But we'll have to see once that feature of rent actually comes out. They did a big quality of life improvement by doing two things that work together. They reduced the weight of many items like rocks, clay, and sand, and increased the carrying capacity of the skid steer and excavator. This is really nice, because if you've played the game, you know that you've been unable to fill your truck while you're mining for rocks. But now you can completely fill the truck and have some weight carrying capacity to spare. The same was true with the skid steer and excavator. For example, the skid steer before could only carry about 160 chunks of rock before having to unload it somewhere. Now it can sport a full 400 chunks of rock, which completely fills all the slots with 80 pieces. They did several crafting balances in this update as well. Glass takes more sand and needs crushed limestone to make, which is good. Prior to 9.0, glass used to be the easiest Tier 2 material to make by far, and because of that, people were building these all-glass houses that just looked very strange. It's also good that it takes more sand, because it seems that sandstone, which is the primary thing used to make sand, is always in excess on almost every server I've been on. So it's good there's even a greater demand for sand, which is going to provide some additional work for miners, who do seem to get a little less busy in the later stages of the game. They also added an alternative path to make that glass through the use of quicklime. They increased the amount of coal and quicklime needed for making steel, which again adds another larger demand for coal, and made quicklime a static ingredient. Static ingredients are the ones that aren't influenced by the modules plugged into the tables that make them more efficient at using a given material. With all these extra demands on limestone, either in crushed form or for quicklime, they modified the spawning of limestone with some changes to its overall formation and distribution in the rocks. There was a technical upgrade as well, which I believe should help performance. They changed the usage of your GPU to use more additional VRAM. If you've ever looked at any of your hardware stats while the game was running, you probably noticed that your GPU was constantly pegged at a maximum usage, which was the default value. For me, this always made my card run really hot. But they changed things to allow you to use more of the video memory, which might distribute some of the strain of just pumping things straight through the processor itself, and might even help with performance and rendering in the game. Maybe if you have even a fairly decent card like a 1070 with 8 GB of RAM, you'll see some improvement. We'll see. Specifics of hardware usage are not my forte, so if anyone out there is really knowledgeable in this area and wants to post some additional information in the comments, please do so everyone can see it. Lastly was a really important change to the environmental balance of the game. There's a lot of future improvements planned to make the ecological aspect of the game a lot more challenging. Up till now, it's been relatively difficult to completely corrupt your world with pollution using the default server settings. What the developers have done is decreased CO2 absorption by trees by 25%, and increased the maximum CO2 produced by animals from 10 parts per million to 25 parts per million. CO2 is the primary value that regulates both the world temperature and winds up forcing a rise in sea level. So not only can you start getting some climate change, but coastal areas that people have built on can become flooded if you're not watching these CO2 levels. To put some additional pressure on that CO2 number, they decreased the spread rate for all trees. And trees are a major point of CO2 absorption in the game. So it may require a lot more active replanting by people who are clear-cutting forests. I like these environmental changes to make the ecological aspect a lot more challenging, and they're probably a game balancing precursor to even more ecologically based challenges they plan to introduce in the game. At the beginning, we had cranked up some of these sensitivities around pollution in this DadSpeed server I'm playing, but it looks like we might be in a little bit of trouble with these updates. I think a rise in sea level is unpreventable at this point. There were a lot of bug fixes as well, but what features are you liking the best in this update, or just general aspects of the game? Put some of your thoughts down in the comments because I do enjoy reading people's thoughts and getting their feedback. Like and subscribe and all that jazz, and I'll be talking to you later.